Well, whenever Atlantis went down, a lot of them, some of them went to Egypt, the one survivors, and to other places, but some of them went underground. And there's an entire cities all throughout. There's all kinds of tunnels and transportation systems that link them all together. Some of the trains and things down there can go 3,000 miles an hour to link the cities together. There's like a sun inside the earth that lights everything. So they have light, they have lakes, they have water, they have everything they need. And there's animals down there that do not exist on the surface of the earth. They have live computers, if you want to say that. This is in my second volume of the Convoluted Universe. It talks about the underground cities. They have computers that we can't even approach that can create and do anything they want. And the people are so advanced, they have no desire to come to the surface. They have everything they need down there. They've been down there for thousands and thousands of years. And they're much more advanced than we are because there's no wars, there's no violence. But yeah, there's civilizations under the surface of the earth. And people say, well, it can't be, there's only the magma. It's not.
Hey guys, welcome back. Just a reminder, we have a new Hopewell Farms CBD promo code UltraJTT15 gets you 15% off the 1,000 milligram and 2,000 milligram CBD for a limited time only, so take advantage of that. The regular promo code Journey to Truth 10 is still active. That gets you 10% off all the other merchandise. The two promo codes do not stack. But make sure you take advantage of that, especially if you haven't tried their CBD and you're looking for a new one to try. Highly recommend it. I absolutely love the stuff. It's really helping me with some back pain and some other areas of my life. And I don't know what I would do without it. Aaron, what is the new Teespring code? Is it still the same?
Yeah, 20 and back. If it works for you, I know you said it wasn't working.
Right.
And I think a couple other people weren't for some reason. It worked for me, so I think it works for some people.
So yeah, 20 and back, which 20 and back spelled out, that is that gets you 20% off all of our Teespring merchandise. If it works, we've been having trouble with the promo code.
And then J2T20 is another one I made if that one doesn't work.
Oh, so they're both active actually.
They're both active still.
Okay. Well, there you go. And that link is below, and so take advantage of that. Get 20% off all of our Teespring merch if you're so inclined. Today, we are joined by Daniel Sala, coming to us from Transylvania, and I'm not joking. He's coming to us from Romania. He's a researcher. He's been doing tons of research involving the SSP, the Bucegi Mountains, and today we're going to get into Hollow Earth, Inner Earth civilizations in particular. And we're going to dive into some of the research he has done and he has brought to the table for us. And we're really looking forward to it. This is one of my favorite subjects. I can't get enough of it. And it seems to be more and more relevant right now. A lot of inner earth activations lately, you could say, especially in the regards of certain animals surfacing that we haven't seen in a while, in particular the white whale and things that have rumored to have been existing in inner earth. I feel like there's some sort of activation transition happening with all that. So it's going to be an interesting topic, and Daniel is going to tell us exactly why and how planets are inhabitable on the inside, and he's going to bring the science to prove that. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I think it's high time this subject was understood because it's full of stigma, and it's as real as it gets, and I find that it's more approachable than some other stuff that's considered conspiracies. So if you can make some breakthrough with this, then you can go a long way with the others too. So I was very skeptical myself about this for the longest time. I had no inclination, until reading the Radu Cinamar series. That's what it took to convince me, and it was pretty much an on and off flip. I was all in after that because he does it very gradually. Only by the fifth book, which is like 12 years into the saga, do you actually get inside. And he knew to pace it slowly that way, so it wouldn't shake anyone up too much. So yeah, I think it would be best to start with the scientific reason why the solid Earth theory is really outdated. And it shouldn't come as such a big surprise, really, because if you think about that, all the sciences, but especially cosmology, is so wide open to anything because it's so dated in every way, really, because just have to look at the Big Bang Theory, how it violates the first law of thermodynamics, which says that you can't have matter coming out of nothing. And it believes that 96% of the universe is dark matter, which is undefinable. So the best thing to do is just prove one by one why planets are hollow, and actually not just planets, but stars as well. So,
right. Yeah.
So
well, I'm going to stop you real quick. So this book series you were talking about, can you say that again for the listeners?
Well, in English, it's called the Transylvania series. And yeah, I highly recommend it. It's seven deep in right now volumes, but yeah, it starts off very easy. So this goes for any normie friends of yours. It would be such a good lead-in for anyone. And yeah, but to start, it covers the technical aspect of it as well of Hollow Earth. But actually, for the best details there, you're going to want to look up "Is the Earth Really a Solid" by Oliver Milatovic, which is what I will start with right now. His finds, which so he explains how the current theory is essentially just a series of extrapolations and guesswork, because you haven't so far gotten deeper than 12.2 kilometers into the Earth, which only scratches the surface of the crust, which is around 50 to 70 kilometers deep in the continents, and very, very shallow, about 3 to 5 kilometers under the oceans. And next you have the mantle, which is actually incidentally the last part that they got right, which is roughly 2,500 kilometers deep. And then, according to them, you have the inner and outer core, and the outer core is liquid and the inner core is solid. And it's the dynamism, the movement of the metals, because they're allegedly made of iron and nickel, an alloy. It's the movement of these two that creates the magnetic field. But before that, so yeah, the deepest borehole, which is in Kola Peninsula, only gets to 0.19% of the way, which is 6,300 kilometers. So that should tell you how much we really know. I mean, how much experiential data we have. The only thing that we can actually go by at all, and in terms of mantle and cores, is seismology, which is the study of vibrations, but mostly earthquakes. And regarding, I don't even know where to start, because honestly, it's so full of misconceptions.
Well, we don't have to. Yeah, exactly. And so basically, I mean, we can all agree. Pretty much most of our listeners can agree with what you're saying as far as it being, quote, hollow or inhabitable. And it's interesting that the dimensions you're coming up with for the crust, because I've done some research into hollow Earth and other experiencers, and they claim that the Earth's crust is roughly 300 miles. I don't know what that is in kilometers. 300 miles thick all the way around, and 150 miles in the center of that is the gravity belt, or magnetic field is what they call it. And the whole planet is actually like a pear shape. It's not actually perfectly spherical, and you see evidence of that. And the Van Allen belt, which is just a magnetosphere that they've told us we can't travel through, which is not true. But the shape of that is actually the shape of the Earth. And if you look at the above view of the graphic of that, it tells you what the shape of the planet is. It wouldn't make sense to have a perfectly round planet inside of that magnetosphere. And it's really interesting. And it's also like a torus. So there's the holes at each pole. And it's like, so if the planet is spinning at 17 miles per second in an electric universe, it's a massive power station, and it's creating all this electrical currents. And that's how the gravity is formed. Anyway, I could go on and on and on, but it's interesting to hear the discrepancies in the thickness of the crust from your research. I'm just curious, like what it actually is and what that actually looks like.
Oh yeah, I'm glad you brought it up because there are many schools of thought, of course. And the 300-mile mark is, I think, from Smoky God, but that is full of inaccuracies anyway. And some say, like Diane Robbins says, who wrote the books on Telos, that it's 800 miles, but no, there's no way, because it has to be thicker because, oh, and by the way, so the crust is just, what we're on is very small, very, shallow, but the mantle, that's the thick one, and that's the last one they got right, and but they have no idea what it's inside there, because the most they can get is some scarce rocks coming up from the lava, from eruptions for there are several hundred kilometers, but that's it. And you're stuck with the finds which, by the way, the findings in Kola Peninsula, in the borehole, that's the deepest one, and there's another one in Germany that's 9 kilometers. Those all went against the textbooks completely in every way. So the pressure, the temperature, the density, and they even found water. But mainly, it's the fact that they predicted that the deeper down you go, you're gonna get a gradual increase in all these things like pressure, density, temperature, and they actually found that it got less dense after the 9-kilometer mark. And they even found basalt way deeper, than twice as deep as they expected, and all these things. That the guy who was in charge of that operation admitted that they have to give up to admit to the fact that they really have no clue what's going on under the earth. And at least they had the integrity, the Russians, to do that. And by the way, most of it was swept under the rug. There's only 2 books ever on the subject, and they haven't made their way to mainstream, although they're as rooted in size as anything else. But about the sizes, so I think I have it pretty accurate, because in the aforementioned Cinamar series, you have a way to really ascertain it really clinically, because they have such things as Akashic field tapping devices. Actually, coincidentally, in inner Earth, they go there and use this and see a section of the Earth. So that's going to tell you. Not just that, but it's in real time. And then they made the estimate that it's between 2,300 and 2,500 kilometers deep. That's in miles, some like 1,600, I think. And so there's your answer in terms of that. But by the way, just to go back to the evidence part, because it's pretty important. So at least make a highlight reel, because there's so many. So the seismology, how it works is they have 2 types of waves, and that's the only thing that you can get any read on the inside of the planet, because these earthquakes actually penetrate all the way to the other side of the Earth, and then they have this seismology. Seismographs all over the Earth. They have these stations, and they can get data on any earthquake, and they see that the first waves to penetrate are always the longitudinal or P waves, and they are the fastest. And also, this goes, for example, if you were to hit like a slab of rock with a hammer, it would also undergo these 2 types of waves. 2 major ones, because the ones that travel in 3D, for example, because you have surface waves, and those are responsible for the earthquakes and devastation on the overground, but those aren't what's used in seismology. What's used here is the primary that I mentioned, and those are also compression waves, and they're the fastest, and they're always the first to arrive. And you have the shear waves, or secondary, or S waves, and those are like this. And those are the second to arrive, and they use the difference between the two to always measure what's the materials inside and what's happening inside there. And they have to make many adjustments. But the point is, only one of these 2 penetrate through all states of matter, which is the first ones. They go through liquid, solid, and gaseous. And the second ones, because they only go through solid, they got to the conclusion that the core is liquid. This is the inception of that notion. And the reality, of course, is that it's gaseous. But yeah, and also this was interesting that they found, judging from earthquakes that originated in the exact same spot, they found without any doubt that the inner core, which is the one that they consider solid, which, there is something there because of how earthquakes penetrate. So they do get some data, except they base it on this false theory of, solid earth. So the materials that they consider are there are completely wrong and unproven and just, false. But anyway, so yeah, so let me think. I lost my train of thought.
No, you're good. You're talking about how the earthquake, there must be something solid. You're talking about the gaseous center.
Yeah, they got to the conclusion that the inner core moves. It rotates faster than the mantle because of all earthquakes that originate in the same place. And that shouldn't be possible, according to their theory, because they're thinking that it's very slight interplay, but that's for many reasons that's impossible as well because of the difference in material. So for convection, there will have to be a bigger difference. The liquid layer and the solid layer are 23% difference in density, according to them, and that alone should prohibit convection. But anyway, so they got through the S waves to the conclusion that it's liquid, and then the earthquakes also, they say that they only go to 150 kilometers, whereas they go to 650, and that's confounded them because they were certain that you couldn't have an earthquake that low because of the plates being too soft at that depth. So that shows the fact that you had 8.3 magnitude at 600 plus kilometers shows that it's really not far off, and that it past the 12-kilometer spot that we reached, you can't really make any prediction at all, not any safe one anyway. And they say that the temperature inside the inner core is as hot as the sun, and that it's an effect from 4.5 billion years ago, because they're going by their theory of accretion, where particles just hit each other. And by the way, they say also that it's made of nickel and iron, which is impossible to get an alloy that clean. You would, not just that, but the way you get nickel and iron and these heavy metals in the galaxy is only through dying stars. And they got to the conclusion that the Earth is very dense in the middle, 8.5 grams per cubic centimeter, because of the orbit. They judged the mass from its orbit, which is roughly correct, but they got the average density, and so they knew the density on the surface, which is about 2.75, and they got to the realization, so-called, that in the center it has to be super heavy, and they only materials that they could ham fist there were nickel and iron, but they're really rare, and you're never going to find them in such pure form ever. Plus the amounts involved are so unproportional to the rest of the solar system. It's absurd. But I don't even know. So they also say that the pressure in the core in the middle is 3.4 million times more than on the surface, and all these things, that the heat from the center is a remnant of 4.5 billion years ago from when it heated up, and it's still, that's what drives all these magnetic fields and everything today. And where should I go next?
Well, hang on, let's just slow down for a second. Well, first of all the facts and the data is absolutely crucial as far as proving what you're talking about. But I don't want to spend too much time on the numbers, because we might lose some people, who don't understand all that lingo. So let's go back to the gaseous center that some people call like the central sun, the inner earth sun, that we've heard of a lot of the experiencers and testimonies that come back and talk about the inner earth having its own sun, and then if you take the planet as more of a donut shaped, pear shaped, it's like a torus field, right? There would be what some people call a black hole or a sun, another star in the middle of our planet. And it's no different than the sun on the surface. It just exists within. And we completely have a misunderstanding of the planet itself. And we've talked about this with Jacques Doubleday when we had him on the show, talking about the expanding Earth theory and how it would actually, it's constantly expanding and the science behind that. But so what are your thoughts on that sun, on that actually being a sun that is allowing life, that is hosting life within the planet?
Of course, yeah. And just quickly before I get to the sun, on the expanding Earth theory, just the most absurd, the most striking aspects are the fact that, well, Pangea couldn't have been a thing because they think that it's only on one side, which would have destabilized. That's not how any planet works. So it would have, destabilized the center of gravity from the center of rotation. And also the fact that if you try to make a jigsaw out of the continents, they never fit unless you shrink the whole planet way down. And this is the most telling fact, is that the crust, as I mentioned before, the thickness of the crust under the ocean is so much smaller, which suggests that there was a rift that just got bigger as the planet expanded. It's the only conclusion. So anyway, about the inner sun, yeah, you can say it's a black hole, but only if you also make the caveat that it emanates just as much as it attracts. And also, just to fast forward way a lot in that science book, which by the way was written by a guy who does this, has a bachelor's degree in geology. So not just geology, but also an engineer. So the engineers you'll find are much more truthful about these things than universities, because they actually have to come up with results, not just theories. And about the sun, yeah, and not just the sun, inner sun, but also the reason why it's hollow, and yeah, it's not really comparable to the outer sun, but it's definitely a sun. It's the fact that the way planets are formed, really, I have to mention, is called protoplanetary disks, and they're vortices, and they've only been observable since 1994 through Hubble, and they were noticed around new stars. And it turns out that planets and stars form at the same time, and that, yeah, they are, first of all, only a disk, so only seemingly in 2 dimensions. But then they accounted for, so the reason why they begin to start with is differences in temperature, in density of the gases, because they did get the fact that it happened in nebulas. They are the stellar nurseries, right? But they have no idea about so the theory of accretion. First of all, any particle that's bigger than 1 centimeter is going to go towards the sun, because that's the biggest object. And all the laboratory tests they made with particles either came out that the particles, if they came too slow, one to the other, would not merge, or they would just shatter. And that's obvious. Logic dictates that. But anyway, so about how they're actually made. So the whole gestalt of the universe actually is vortices, or turbulence, I guess. They're the most, elegant, the most energy saving, and the most long-lasting.
Right. It's interesting. We have information coming forward now about these a lot. It's coming through the Akashic records and channelers and stuff, but about the blueprinters and the universe. Like, so it's not necessarily done naturally like we thought. There's actually people, groups terraforming these planets, and this is a major theory at this point, but we can't ignore that this is new information coming in. And this blueprinter term is coming up over and over and over again. And it makes perfect sense to me that there is an intelligent design behind all of it. And it's not just a random act of science. And that's a whole other topic. But let's get back into the planet. I want to start talking about some of the civilizations that we've heard about, and how like even the Germans ended up making their way down there and what they discovered. And let's get into some of that information.
Of course. Yeah. And yeah, you just to finish up with the sun, that you can call it black hole, but the main point is that the center point is responsible for everything that's on the surface. Like I said, you could say it's vortex, but the point is there's a huge gap there in the middle. And I'm just going to skip the science if you want to know about the civilization. So apparently, according to Diane Robbins and Aurelia Jones, they are the two authors that apparently telepathically communicate with both Telosians, which are the inner Earth city from just under Mount Shasta, which is very well documented as far as these places go, and with a couple of hollow Earth links too, or intraterrestrials, I guess. But yeah, the Agartha network, which is the cities that you find inside the mantle, are apparently called the Agartha network also used to be called Shambhala the Lesser, and they are made up of 120 cities, or so I heard. But also other sources say that there are hundreds of civilizations. So, but yeah, at least this network apparently is 120, and they're mostly made of Hyperboreans, overwhelmingly, which, according to Cinamar's books, were on Earth about 50,000 years ago, and they made so all these peoples like the Atlanteans and Hyperboreans underwent a change. They basically couldn't remain on the surface because the surface more and more went into the frequencies of 3D, and it used to be much more interchangeable before. And there were even wars fought over the last remaining portals as the chasm got smaller and smaller. But yeah, and apparently many of these peoples either went elsewhere or they departed or they absconded inside the Earth, and where they could continue, because this is important to mention that as you go inside, certainly past the mantle, you are fully in the etheric realm, which is also known as 4D, but you also already feel the mark gradually as you go deeper. So by the time you're near the end, you have much more elevated, states and feelings when you're inside. But
Correct.
So your question? Oh,
no, I was agreeing with you. Yeah.
Okay. All. Yeah, and yeah, the other thing, other than the Hyperboreans, apparently there are also 4 Lemurian outposts inside Earth and 2 Atlanteans. So not very many, but apparently there are Atlanteans inside Hollow Earth as well. But as far as Romania goes, they are mainly populated by Dacians, who were the people that's the most famous around here. And there's a lot of hype about it. But what's not known, and by the way, this goes for many other civilizations that you find no remnants, for example, of their writings. It could very well be that that's because they went inside Earth, and it's well known that many North American peoples know for sure that their ancestors were from inner Earth, and not just them, but Eskimos too. And yeah, the Dacians underneath Romania have many cities, and they're interconnected, and you can travel from one to the other without needing any tunnels. You just raise the frequency of vibration of the ship, which they're very advanced in, because they had so much freedom to just evolve unencumbered by the surface, and you won't find any of them who are envious of the surface people, although they are very open to collaboration, always willing to do it, and especially now more than ever.
So yeah, so there's a lot to unpack. So if we just go back to Telos under Mount Shasta and the Agartha network, there's information that claims that starts as as how should I say this? 1 mile beneath the surface, as near as 1 mile beneath the surface, actually under Mount Shasta is where actually that city starts, and there's like 5 levels to that city. And as you get deeper, it expands, and there's all kinds of fantastic stuff happening there. And they claim that Agartha network is comprised of 100 plus cities that are all connected via a tunnel system, which is like type of a maglev type of transport or train, but it's like it's actually pushed by like a cushion of air, so it never touches the sides, and travels up to 3,000 miles per hour. And also, they're not just inner Earth, but they are also communicating galactically and coming and going from the planet. And the reason they're able to remain undetected is because they use a technology, what they call interdimensional shift technology, and it allows them to somehow shift and remain undetected when they're coming and going from the planet. It's all very interesting. What kind of information does any of your research align with that stuff?
Yep, you're pretty much dead on with the depth. I was also curious about Telos, I should say, about how deep it is. But yeah, 1 mile is where it starts, and it goes apparently not very deep, 2 more miles. But yeah, it's on 5 levels, and they're made up of Lemurians, who was a huge chunk of land in the Pacific, and California was just at the rim of it. And both Lemuria and Atlantis went down after I'm just saying her information, which is Diane Robbins. But yeah, apparently the Lemurians and Atlanteans warred, and because of how nasty that war was, they were, that led to the destruction and the sinking, but it was gradual. It's not like Plato said, like overnight. And so the millions of Lemurians that were on the surface asked the permission of, at the time, mostly Hyperboreans in the Agartha network, to have this place for themselves, this place under Mount Shasta, which they had apparently to drain out the magma from the lava tubes for it. And yeah, they were allowed it, but they only managed to transport 25,000 people. And apparently some of the priests and elders had to remain just to ease the mass exodus of the people who are fated to die there. And apparently Old Lang Syne, they sang that, and it's one of their songs, and not the Irish. They just got inherited it, and only 25,000 made it to Telos, and by now they are up to either 1.2 or 1.5 million. You hear both numbers, and there are 5 levels there, like you said. The first 2 are mainly administrative. That's where most of the population is, and their schools, and they are not too dissimilar in that you'll also learn as you're a very young child. But unlike us, they are very insistent on this, that they basically don't age, and they choose when to die.
Right.
And their lifetimes go into tens of thousands of years, which means that some of them are actually lived in the real Lemuria and have memories of there. But also there's the fact that when you're in Earth, you're probably not subject to the veil, which is the limiting of the DNA strands, which also had its good reason. But before that, you're not, therefore you remember your past life, so it's not such a big deal anyway. But if you want, I can go more into the Telos culture.
Right. Well, it's interesting. Like I've read that they, like you were right, like they had to move to inner Earth because of the surface dropping into 3D, dropping into the third dimension. And they, back whenever they did migrate there, they were actually utilizing some of these tunnels, these magma tubes, lava tubes, or whatever, to bring air down into their city. But they've since had to close those off because the air is now so polluted. So they have their own way of providing oxygen, which is their own ecosystem, very similar to exactly how it works on the surface, but it's just more pure in essence. And the fact that they're able to live as long as they do has everything to do with the birthing process also, which we have all wrong on the surface. And they do the water birth. It only takes 3 months, and as soon as they find out the mother is pregnant, they put her in a chamber for 3 days, and they just basically play all these beautiful sounds and frequencies and tones and these positive words to code the DNA of the child. So when it's born, it's not born with any trauma, and that plays a huge part into the life expectancy of them.
Well, yeah, you're right about how they birth and stuff like that, but they are also, it's hard to keep track because sometimes they say that drinking water is what gives them super longevity, and sometimes they say that it's because of they're so careful with the food, and other times they say that it's just a matter of healthy thinking. So it's basically all of these things, I would guess. But yeah, about what I found interesting, you mentioned the pregnancy. They, first of all, only get pregnant when they plan way ahead, months ahead. This apparently is a genetic defect of the surface dwellers, that we get, unexpected pregnancies. And not just this, but they have two types of relationships, like the couples. First, they only start with what they call bond relationships, which can last indefinitely, but it's agreed that you can at any point just mutually agree to separate and remain friends. And there's many couples living like this in the first two levels. And by the way, they have a pyramid that houses 50,000 or so people. And the second type of relationship is a committed one, from which apparently there's no divorce. But before that, you can go hundreds of years in each other's company, and their sexual union is always involving all the chakras, unlike apparently ours, which only do the first two. And the planning of the incarnation is also a very long process, and they know exactly what soul they're inviting in, because they have to be careful. For example, just think of this super long life means you have great grandsons. So and also space is limited in the inner Earth caverns. That's another big aspect. So you have to be careful. But yeah, apparently they don't even have a money system. Everything's taken care of. They only have to work 4 to 5 hours every few days, every 5 days, which is like 20 to 25 hours a week. But whenever you're expecting a child, you are excused of that, and you can spend a couple of years, just giving all the attention to the child. And
right.
Yeah.
Well, it's just a completely different lifestyle, obviously. Actually, Aaron's getting ready to go to Mount Shasta next week, right? He's gonna go into a conference tomorrow.
I'm heading it's this weekend.
Going to a conference there, and
there's a guy named Lowell, however you pronounce his name. Lowell Johnson, who's going to be there, who I've seen some interviews of him online, and he claims he went inside. He claims he was on a hike in Mount Shasta, and this Telosian being, like in a white robe, appeared and like invited him into Telos, and he physically went there, not just astrally or his spirit. Like he physically went there, and this guy gave him a tour around the whole city, and he tells the whole story, and it's amazing. It's fascinating.
Right. And that's actually
at this conference, so I'm going to get to see him talk, and I'm hoping to get to meet him and get him on the show. Hopefully.
And have him take you to where he was brought in. So
yeah, I'll ask. Yeah, that would be amazing.
Well, that's actually an interesting point to bring up, because you can't just go and find some entrance down to the Agartha network. Maybe you can in a certain area to an extent, but you have to be, from my understanding, you have to be invited based on the purity of your intention and your essence, I guess. So, and there's certain areas, specific locations where you can go and meditate and get into that state and basically ask for permission. And I know that doesn't just exist in Mount Shasta. There's other places in the world, apparently, where you can do this. And I think, Daniel, did you say one time in our conversations that there was a location in Wisconsin that you could do this?
Actually, it's in Yosemite Park.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very tempting, at least for me, because it's in the fifth book called Inside the Earth in the Transylvania series. And it's one of the 3 Hollow Earth trips, and it has 2 in Inner Earth. And of course, when I'm talking about Hollow Earth, I'm talking about the big, gap there in the big hollow, which is, I should also mention, approximated as the size of Venus, even though it's not really, if you consider the thickness of the mantle, but because, as I mentioned, you're in a slightly higher plane, more elevated, then that's the best approximation. And because it goes, as I said, higher in dimension towards the center, the approximation of the astro, or 5D, is about the size of Mars, and then the 60 is about the size of Mercury, and then 7 is roughly the size of the Moon, which is that's the size of the point of singularity that is responsible for the implementation of everything. And by the way, that's where the spirit of the Earth resides, and it's masculine. It's not feminine. The feminine side is the breathing, living part, which is Gaia, and they have to work together. But he definitely got this short sensation, short knowing, short download. But and also when Radu Cinamar would glean this information, it wouldn't just be through those holographic akashic devices. He also had a helmet that could help him synthesize this information, and would read it would be telepathic, and it would just be guided by thought, and very intuitive. But this is from a town that's very near the surface, so you don't have to go that deep. But I wanted to mention that. And so about Lowell, I found him the most credible, or top 2 definitely, of all the Inner Earth accounts. He just rails off what you want to hear. It doesn't go into meandering. And I have absolutely no doubt that he went there, and that unfortunately he only went there once. He met with them a second time, but apparently he is now very gifted at sensing every little change, and he sees with 5D overlays as well. So definitely would be maybe a good guess for you guys. But so what was your question?
We were talking about Yosemite, that area there.
Of course. Of course. I'm convinced that you can triangulate the position just based on the descriptions of the houses, because it's not such a big area. And apparently it's a reservation of Native Americans. And they were, the Americans, the government, the Black Ops, wanted to find out more about this portal, because they knew they had a portal as far back as 1776. And they wanted to, find out more. However, they only sent, of all the people they sent there, the parapsychologists and such, only one managed to go through. So they weren't really happy with it. So they sent these 2 Romanians, Radu Cinamar and his friend, and they were apparently these Native Americans. The reason why I think it's very approachable is that they were very humble, very welcoming, and they knew ahead of time. So it's not like you can go there and demand anything. You're gonna be expected there, like you said, and that's one of the ways you can get in, but it's not the only way, because there are also portals. And if you want, I can go into the modes of entry inside. The
modes of entry, you said?
Because there's more than one, yes.
Well, okay, so let's talk about that. Obviously, you can it's some sort of portal. There may be a physical entrance. Then we have the poles, which is a completely different story. That's what accounts for all these old explorers and how they found their way into Inner Earth. And even Admiral Byrd and some other guy, flying 1,700 miles past the pole. He should have been at a known landmass, but he wasn't, because when you're going around that curve, you don't even realize that you're going around the curve of the crust, because it's such a large surface area. You think you're still on the surface. You don't even know that you've gone upside down. And that's where they found themselves. And gravity doesn't change. And that's where he talks about the land beyond the poles. that's what he was referring to. And that's where flat earthers think that he's talking about some ice wall, but that's not really the case. He really just went around that curve. But tell us about the other modes of getting in, please.
Yeah, the most famous one is the polar entrances, and you also have many schools of thought there, but I've come to find that it's more of a portal, not an opening as a physical one. And it's subtle in that you're suddenly gonna see animals or vegetation that wouldn't belong there. And you're going to feel warm winds, and obviously you're going to see the inner sun, which is static, although it does, I mean, it rotates, but it remains the same position mostly. And it's only 2/3 in intensity of our sun. And that the some of the books like Goddess of Advatabar say that it's physical, but I think that pretty much disgrace. The only thing that you could argue that gives this, because Cinamar goes into detail how it's a Mobius strip, and that yeah, you're not going to have, the only physical opening inside are the very wavy and very rare cave systems that go to a certain depth, but very rarely do they reach to the other side. But anyway, about the falls, the only argument that I found for the opening that is you can see is by one of the two women who write on Telos, that apparently in the year 2000 they placed a magnetic force field there, and they shielded it, they camouflaged it. I guess it's not such a big, step to take, because of how even we have such technology in the SSV, and even the Butchage base is protected by such cloaking technology. But I'm still going to go with the theory that it's just a portal, and that you're not going to get flipped or anything, because it's just doesn't seem realistic. However, there is definitely something going on there, because that is physical as well, because of the tidal waves, which, imagine the Arctic Ocean is like a bathtub. If you make one perturbation in one end, you would expect that to be reflected on the other. But from the data that a certain scientist collected in the 70s and collected, made sure there's no errors, he found that the only explanation that is that there's a half a million square kilometer area that is very shallow, whereas it's considered that the North Pole has a few kilometers of water and only covered in ice. So yeah, there's just something about the poles. But the other ways to get in are portals, which vary a lot in duration. It can be a few minutes up to thousands of years, but that's rare. And these can look very different, and they can be technology based too, like the ones in the Butchage books. That's how that was left there by advanced extraterrestrials, and they still stand. But you have portals that lead you from here to the surface. You have ones that lead you to the mantle and to hollow earth. But we already know that, because we have what are they called, jump rooms, right, to Mars.
Right.
So it's not a big surprise there. But also I guess the other interesting way to get in is the overlapping of, I guess, frequencies between the two planes, which translates sometimes through places that are considered haunted, like forests, but also Bermuda Triangle apparently is one of those places. And it's the way that King Arthur got to visit the Island of Wise Men, and that's depicted in illustrations. And that Avalon apparently is a place in Hollow Earth. So those are the main interways.
And that's interesting too, because a lot of the some people say that a lot of the biblical references to like the Garden of Eden and stuff were actually existed in inner Earth. And I don't know if there's any truth to that, but we hear these theories.
Oh yeah, well, there's absolutely no question in my mind that you do get whole towns retreating there, but it takes a collective to do it. And it's very well explained in the sixth book in the series. So you heard about Shambhala. It's a conglomeration of places, not so much, but it's also considered a capital. And it started 120,000 years ago, but originally it was just very advanced cities on the surface of the earth back when you could have 4D and above, settlements there. But after the, difference got more and more, and there was a division, which culminated at the last cataclysm, some say 12, some say 13,000 years ago. Well, actually, by 27,000 years, it was already completely in inner earth. I mean, in hollow earth, Shambhala. But it's not the only one that went inside. And you just have to apparently put many minds, concentrate them on just wanting to do that. And Shambhala is circular. The first ring is 4D, and then it gets increasingly higher. And I don't know if it's there, but there's also that library of Portologos, which is famous, and apparently it's one of a kind in the universe. I don't know if that, just flaunting it, but they give a lot of good reasons there, that they have also portals going throughout the universe, and they collect everything on these rare crystal tablets that are everlasting, that you can tap into your past lives there. You just sit inside a crystal and you go anywhere you want. And this is what it's cool about that place and other hollow earth places, that, and the Akashic device as well, that it's the best, most interactive and most effective way to learn anything is when you get all this feedback as well, in terms of visuals and also cognitive knowing, downloading of information, and you guide it with just your mind. And that we're being deprived of such learning. And also they say that they have art and theater, and the way I interpret that is they only make certain parameters to generate real movies, because I sincerely doubt that they would have the patience or the willingness to make or watch movies, because they would just be fake. So they probably just generate these real scenarios,
Right.
just watch them. That'd be cool, I think.
I've heard that. Sorry to interrupt, but that's what we would almost understand as the holodeck in Star Trek. They're able to create a movie and actually become part of it. That's the way I've heard it described. And apparently they like to spend a lot of time playing on the holodeck, is what they would call it down there. As far as entertainment goes, going back to, well, for one, Shambhala, from my understanding, is like the innermost city nearest the core, I guess we could say, and like the deepest. And then like the Agartha network is much closer to the surface than we would even imagine, as far as from what I understand. And then you talk about tapping into this Akashic record. They also talk about a highly spiritualized computer network that they use that connects all the sub-cities and even gives them galactic communication. But apparently this computer system is amino acid based. I don't even understand that, but that's the way they describe it. And it allows them also to tap into the Akashic records for personal growth reasons, if there's something that they would need. And it also like gives them lets them know if they have a vitamin or nutrient deficiency. It's a very sophisticated underground computer, like an internet basically, but it's, I guess, more of an organic style. I don't really understand that. Do you have any better understanding of that computer network?
Well, yeah, I read that they pretty much stop at amino acids. They don't go into depth. That's why the Cinamar series is by far the best, because they tell it from the point of view of the experiencer, whereas these are basically channeled messages, and they're never going to compare as much as I would say that as far as channel messages, these are really seem really legit. So they don't have, they don't squeeze in any agenda at all. But yeah, that's why those are the best Romanian series. But about the technology, well, first of all, it's telonium is the name of the metal that they store this all this vast knowledge on. But yeah, and I'm not sure exactly. I know they're interconnected, like you said, and they have trade relations through those tunnel systems. But as far as the information, but you did mention Shambhala, and I want to make this as clear as possible. So the Agartha network is only located in the mantle, which is like this, and the hollow is not dissimilar to how it would be on the surface, and that's where Shambhala is as well. And it is you have to see it from a certain angle to even see the curvature, the inner curvature, but you do see it sometimes. But yeah, and that's the most elevated because it's fully 4D and above. But you do have many cities, and apparently the land is even bigger than what it is on Earth, because obviously Earth is mainly covered by, the surface, because it's covered by a lot of water. And there, even though the surface is a little smaller, 3/4 of it is land, and that's multiple sources saying that. But yeah, if you want, I can go into what. Go ahead.
Let's talk about, okay, so this is all fascinating. Yeah, I've heard the same thing, 3/4 land, only 1/4 water. They do have their own oceans and rivers, and some of those rivers continue to outer Earth, like the Tigris and Euphrates River actually go inner Earth. Also, I've heard, and it's like, I don't understand all of it, but apparently it's a lot of the rivers down there are actually the names of the river on the surface, because it's actually the same river. And a lot of these places, we don't know where that water is going. It just keeps going, and like that's exactly where it's going. But we hear these accounts of these animals that apparently are supposed to be extinct, that are living and still existing in inner Earth. Not only existing, but they're tame, like a saber-toothed tiger would actually be tame, that you could play with, and then the gigantic trees that they claim are up to 1,000 feet tall, 250 feet in diameter. They go for miles. Like, this is all amazing stuff. And some of these trees, some of these logs are actually found floating out into our oceans, and they don't know where these trees are come from. And they even wash up on banks sometimes, and they have these massive trees, these logs that like don't have any place in our reality, that are washing them up on the shore in certain land masses. All that type of stuff is really fascinating to me. And I don't know if you can add to that at all.
Yeah. So you have a certain event in 2007. It's called the Arctic calving. It was the first time that the Northwestern Passage was open. And usually you get 50 to 60 new species in the ocean every year. But that year it was 1,500. And the next year, I should say. And you have certain animals like the Ross gull and the type of ox that go northward in the winter. And they don't have, especially the gull, doesn't have special insulation at all. And then you have bears, foxes, butterflies, and mosquitoes that go above the 80-degree parallel, which they don't, in the case of mosquitoes, they aren't seen for hundreds of kilometers south of that. So, and also, of course, there's temperatures. Everyone reports warm winds as you go north, as far back as the 19th century. So you can't blame it on global warming or anything.
Right.
But yeah, you have I don't know if you have rivers continuing. I would have to check. It'd start to wrap your mind around that, but definitely that the water plays a major role, and that's where obviously, because it's considered that the water came from meteorites and stuff. But even the most dank meteorite only have so much, which is not a lot. And they actually, from 600,000 seismograms, the University of Washington managed to detect waves crashing inside, and they officially acknowledge the fact that they have an ocean there that's at least the size of the Arctic, which is their conservative estimate. And that actually accounts for the wobble of the Earth orbit. But also, just as a fun curiosity, in the book about the solid Earths and color, it says that the precession of the equinox is also another myth that needs busting, because you know what it is, right? When the Earth has that extra spin, not just on one axis but on the other another, and it's considered that the moon is responsible for it. So that's why it's tilted like that, and it takes 26,000 years or so, a Platonic year, to get back to the original alignment of the stars. But what they don't account for is the fact that the moon can't have that much pull. The calculations just don't add up. But also that idea was postulated back in Copernicus' days, who considered that the sun was static. They had no idea about the galaxy. So what that turns out to be, the precession of the equinox, is only the movement of the whole solar system inside the galaxy, which it apparently travels at 828,000 kilometers an hour. So that's the misconception there.
Interesting.
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah, going back to it getting warmer as you go north, and a lot of these old accounts talk about that, obviously, and animals going there, migrating there. Where are they going? And we have even accounts of Eskimos, like the naked Eskimos, they would call them. Like they get so far north, they're wearing like tribal clothes, like we would imagine Native Americans wearing in North America. In the heat, and we have accounts of them too, and they've come across bases where they can tell, or settlements where they can tell these Eskimos are migrating north. And why would it make sense for them to migrate north if it's as cold as we're taught, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all that's very fascinating. Then we have this Siberian mastodon or woolly mammoth bed of bones that they think is they all died in some cataclysm at one time, and they were extremely well preserved, even down to like some of the meat being fresh and some of the food in the stomach not even being digested yet. They think that it was so well preserved, but what's happening is this is actually a washout from one of the inner earth rivers, and some of these woolly mammoths that exist down there, when they die on the riverbanks, that they end up washing out, and they all pile up basically in Siberia. And when they're finding these woolly mammoths that they think are so well preserved, they're actually not new. They're actually fresh. They're not just preserved.
That's why they're well preserved.
Right.
Yeah, because they just died recently.
Yeah. And then I don't know do you know anything about the accounts of the red snow that a lot of explorers claim to see when they get to the poles? Red snow.
No, but that does remind me of Aurora Borealis, how that's another misconception.
Yeah. I'll explain the red snow, then you explain the Aurora Borealis. So this red snow is documented. It's anybody who's been to the poles has experienced this red snow. Apparently what it's from is there's millions of acres of flowers and plant life in inner earth, right? That's just part of the ecosystem. Well, once a year when they're releasing pollen, the pollen in particular is red. And this is just, I don't know how much pollen it would amount to, but that pollen is making it out to the surface, and it mixes with the snow, and when it falls, it's red.
That adds up. And also,
yeah.
Oh, did you finish that?
Well, I just thought, and there's actually been studies on that snow, and this is the actual mainstream scientists determined that yes, there is plant life. This is plant life they're finding in the snow, so that would make perfect sense.
So they're even so mainstream science is even confirming that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
so
yeah, please, tell us about the Aurora Borealis. That's something that actually fascinates me.
Yeah, and for sure. And one last thing, since we're on the northern civilizations, there was this case where vanishing Norse, because that the Vikings discovered the Americas before Columbus, and apparently around 15th century, they had this colony in Greenland, and they lived around that place in Iceland for 500 years, just very well off. And then all of a sudden, a huge colony in Greenland disappears without a single trace. And the guy who was from another colony visited it, and saw that their livestock was there and alive and well. So they had no signs of violence or anything, which kind of leads to, one or two conclusions. And apparently they were spotted by the Eskimos when they asked them. But so the auroras officially, they're considered to be charged particles from the sun, which are colliding with the atmosphere, but very high up, around 80 to 400 kilometers with the atoms in the atmosphere. And that's what lights up the place. But actually, there's a few problems. First of all, you have the magnetic field, which shields Earth, and you shouldn't normally get any such, colliding of particles for about 15,000 kilometers. But they then say that it's the Van Allen belt, but even that one is hundreds of kilometers taller. But also, it's you're never going to get such a discharge down here. And also, but that's just one of it. For example, you have they pulsate at both poles at the same time, which if it were the sun, it would be obviously only lit up on one pole. But
Right.
there have been studies made, and there's no question that it can only be that it comes from the interior, and there's the fact that they're observable in many other planets. Saturn, Jupiter, just two that come to mind. And they're very strong there as well. And by the way, I should mention that Saturn, the hottest spot ever recorded on Saturn, was near its south pole. And it has constant warm winds there. But so, yeah, the only explanation really is that there's an inner sun. And also, NASA had balloon-shaped antennas that were meant to detect neutrinos, which are the smallest particles that they know, and they were flying at 40 kilometers high, and they detected high energy particles that were 70,000 times stronger than the ones that are generated in our most advanced particle accelerators. And the problem with the hypothesis that they come from this, they could ever, and this balloon was meant only to sense things coming off the Earth. And the idea that solar radiation, that solar particles or wind or anything ricochets from the Earth, it doesn't hold water, because any neutrinos that hit the Earth rapidly dissipate. So you could never find them so high, reflected 40 kilometers up in the air. So all these things, obviously, and the warm winds and everything else, point to the inner sun that gives sustenance and that manages to evaporate, is hot enough to evaporate water. And the dimensions of it are subject to, interpretation, but I'm going to go with Cinamar that it's between 700 and 800 kilometers in diameter.
What is the inner
sun?
Okay, so the neutrinos, from my understanding, they can pass through matter, through anything, right? But you're telling me that they don't actually pass through; they dissipate when they hit the Earth.
No, I'm saying that this balloon that was sent by NASA, it only was meant to detect neutrinos that were coming off the icy ground.
Right. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
So yeah, it's impossible for them to have been from external. It has to be from the Earth. And
I see what you're saying. It was
70,000 times more powerful than the most advanced particle accelerator is not nothing. So
yeah,
right.
There's no other way to explain that.
Exactly.
No other way to explain that. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, that I've heard that before, but I've never heard it explained on why the northern lights appear as they do coming from inner Earth. So it's directly related to the sun down there,
which is a feature in all the planets. And I really had to have to add this, that the Andromedans dictated this to Collier, which is cool to have, real ET like first-hand information, that all the planets and all the suns are hollow. And apparently there's a town called Kalnogor that was left by Lyrans, and it's in inner Earth, and there's a certain map that contains it and other cities, which kind of lends credibility to that map.
So that would make sense. Like if one planet, like if one planet is formed one way, all of them would have to be formed that way, at least within our solar system, with our template, right?
No
Because
doubt.
in another universe, that template might look completely different. But here, it's all fascinating. Where to go? There's a lot of information here. That the Telos, talking about the actual people that live down there. We were talking about them earlier. One of the things that struck me is they're so in tune and they're so tapped in and advanced. I guess one of the things I read was that even judgmental thoughts can hurt them physically. That's why they can't come to the surface. And that struck me because it's true. Whenever you're really connected with somebody or in a relationship, you almost can read each other's mind at some point. You know when somebody's thinking something, and it has a physical effect on your body. Imagine if that was extremely heightened, and you had to come to the surface and deal with an entire primitive population, right? A civilization that would probably that would be very detrimental to your health. Have you heard this also?
Oh yeah. And you don't have to go very deep to get that. So first of all the in-earth people are forced to live in symbiosis just because of the nature of the place that is very subject to destruction. But still, most of the accounts, if overwhelming majority, depict a very evolved and refined civilizations that are, like you say, like pay attention, and also they're always telepathic. In inner earth they also use voice most of the time, but when you go into the hollow, it's usually reserved to telepathy only, but you still hear it as voice. And of course this telepathy applies even to plants, not alone animals, which they also respect a lot more than. And they do, like you said about the mammoths, they do maintain the extinct ones, that like dinosaurs and pterodactyls and stuff. And yeah, saber-tooth are a feature of Telos, but they also have a huge zoo, you could say, down in the 5th level. But what did you actually bring up? Because
I was go ahead.
The nature of the people. Yeah. So there are apparently 6 levels. This at the 6th level, is the last one where you get meetings between trades and stuff between the intraterrestrials and humans. So the first 6 levels are basically reserved for humans, surface people, and that includes the elites and the DOMs and everything like that, Star Wars and everything. But past the 6th, you pretty much only have, from the accounts, well aligned, but they did apparently get manipulated as well. And I know they seem to get all the blame ever, but it was apparently the Draco that made deals with them as well, and they feel aggrieved. And this is I don't know if you consider her a great source or not, but Kim Gogan, she says that that the Draco manipulated, and that this network, Council of Light, or Garth network, whatever you want to call it, formed. They had their sort of Independence Day in 2019, where they formed what they call an Earth Council, and from that point on, they only want to work with people who are well-intended and who want to restore, the balance, the natural law, and they are very keen on scientists who, want to work for the betterment and stuff. But also this is a big emphasis for them, is repairing our DNA. And this doesn't come just from Kim, it also comes from Cinamar, the main civilization that's discussed in the book, that's 70 kilometers deep, and where he saw all these things in the holographic technology. These are very keen on helping us restore DNA, because apparently certain parts of humanity have it really bad, where it's really damaged, almost irreparably. And not just the DNA, but also the air needs cleaning. And as far as violence, this is interesting that they do have fleets that represent this, this section of the galaxy. And
they call it Silver Fleet, right?
Yeah, that's the one made from Telos and an Atlantean city that's similarly sized under Brazil. and they have Rainbow Fleet and another one I forget. But yeah, if they find an offender that is beyond, help, that impossible to, help, then they they do eliminate people, and they are very good at it. And they, of course, always have what you would call like ministers of security and defense as well. And it probably wouldn't take much for them to, if they united, to wipe out everything on the surface. But of course, they don't want to do that. So
Right. Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, getting into all those details, it's like as above, so below at some point. Obviously it's a lot different. Apparently the ascension process happens a lot quicker down there because of the nature of things. But right now, everything's surfacing. It's like a spiritual war, galactic war, war within, whatever. It's very interesting. And some of the technologies that they talk about, I heard it described that the reason that they were able to basically discover these technologies is because we misunderstood the atom. We split the atom what we should have done instead is accelerate the atom. And by accelerating the atom, it changes the game. And I don't understand the science behind it, but that's like the root of all their technologies is you have to accelerate the atom, not split it. You're actually working against yourself when you split the atom.
Well, it's true about the spin that's what, dictates also your frequency of vibration, but also not just that is really such a major role in astrology as well, and astronomy. The spin of the planet, that's really what gives, for example, Jupiter gives off twice as much energy as it receives from the sun. And they have no explanation for this. And the explanation is obviously it comes from inside, the extra energy. And just an example of how wrong it is to base all the formation of the celestial bodies on gravity as they do, and a little bit on thermodynamics, instead of spin, is that it took them 10 attempts to land their first probe on the moon. And it was completely trial and error. And they still haven't learned any lesson, apparently. I mean, the SSPs have, of course, but yeah. And again, I go on a tangent.
That's all right. I was talking about the accelerating the atom, and I guess you correlated that with the spin. I don't know exactly where you were going with that, but I was talking about the technologies that they have. I'm not sure where you were going with that.
Well, in terms of the atom spin, yeah, that's how it translates. For example, whenever you enter a portal or enter the place of transition near the poles, is just your atom spin faster, and that raises your frequency of vibration, which is often mentioned, but it's true. Like that's what separates the different densities. That's also what makes Telosians able to live so long, mainly other than the purity of the water and everything, and that they after they fell, they raised back up to 5D, and apparently it's very fun to be interchangeable like that. And of course, we know that Syrians are like that. Arcturians, they don't just aren't limited to one density. And yeah, that's all I know about the atom and the spinning.
Right. Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. I mean, we've covered a lot already. I'm going to share a few pictures just to go over what we were talking about earlier, as far as the shape of the planet and stuff, just to give the audience a visual. But my computer's not actually working right now. Like it's literally not working. Oh, there it goes. So as far as the shape of the planet, which I find very interesting, let me share my screen.
And also there's if you want, I can cover the black goo connection.
The black goo connection?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me show this picture real quick, and then we'll okay.
Oh yeah, I know the one.
Of course, it's like extremely tiny here. Oh, there it goes.
There you go.
So apparently this is a computer generated model of the Earth's actual shape shows its shape is like a pear, which is interesting because if you look at that and then you take this image of the Van Allen belt or the magnetosphere from above, how it's all wonky looking, like that. Well, if it was actually a perfect sphere in the middle, this would all be perfect also. But if you compare it to the shape that I just showed you, this makes a lot more sense, as far as this would all be perfect, right? This is just obviously theories because none of us have really been up there to look ourselves. And then according to some people, this is actually an old satellite image of the Earth, and this is where the concept of the holes come from. These images can't be, when you go to Google Earth now, it's solid, but this is, I don't know what year, I think the 60s maybe this was taken. Just something just fascinating, images to kind of go with the visuals to go with what we're talking about. And then this would be that donut-shaped toroid field that we're talking about that actually exists within every planet and every person. Even every person carries this same shape energy field. It's like the Merkaba, but it's all interconnected. And that's why something like a flat Earth doesn't have a place in this universe, because it goes against the template of all that is.
Yes. And not just planets and people, but atoms as well. And they're apparently mini black holes. The ones inside the atoms and particles, they are responsible for you being able to create your own reality at any time, because you basically, all these black holes, so-called, are also portals.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, exactly. I've heard that too. I've heard anyway, go into the black goo and then we'll start wrapping this up.
Sure. And also about it being lumpy like that, well, Penny Bradley, who saw it from space, does say it's potato shaped, but I can speak exactly for that. All I know is that the sphere is the most elegant and basically the gestalt of the universe. It's usually spherical, but it's true that it is, oblong or oblate. I mean, it's a little wider than it is tall. But the other thing was that also Penny Bradley was taught Hollow Earth theory by the Germans on Mars in childhood, and they're probably no fools when it comes to cosmology. So, and
we actually never even got into how the Germans made their way down there. We were supposed to talk about that earlier.
That's a trip, yeah. But
real quick, if you don't mind, what is your theory on like how the Germans got there? They obviously, this goes back to the book, The Coming Race, the Hyperboreans and the Vril and all that stuff, but they were going on these South Pole expeditions looking for something, right? What's your understanding of how that happened?
Well, shall I cover Black Goo first quickly? And because it's a long story.
Okay.
And so before I forget, so there was a mention back when he was watching this holograms with the helmet on, he saw that cosmic water, which apparently is a fundamental thing because the aforementioned black hole at the center of the planet is really a converter of subtle water, because water is multidimensional. And he said that this water, which is findable in the center there, is not pollutable, and it is heavy, and it is completely black, so it absorbs light, and it has bonds that the atom bonds between hydrogen and oxygen, which, by the way, oxygen weighs 88% of it. So, but it's different from all the other states of water, so it's different. But it's also highly charged, highly energetic, and this kind of led me to one conclusion, that it's what we hear Gaia ley lines, or its communication system, which is that abiotic or mineral oil. That's you hear that it's an M state or monatomic, And that is the one that if you drink it, it makes you really, really smart, gives you all these abilities. And it's the, pure, unadulterated type that is not being programmed by ETs and is the one that is running rampant in the galaxy, and it represents the biggest threat, and any planet that gets overtaken by it is going to get sterilized. So,
So you think the black goo comes from this water, or it is this water, is what you're saying?
Because it's well known that the Earth has its own natural black goo deposits. So I can only assume that it comes from the center, and it represents a very important, like in our bodies, for Earth, it would be something akin to like plasma, I guess. And also the fact that we're depleting, this is stressed by many authors, that we're depleting Earth of its resources, such as the oil and the gold as well, is, you can say, equivalent to rape. And it's going to turn on us, the Earth, before very long. We're looking at the next, reset. This they also insist on, not just the Telosians, but Cinamar as well. One of the main characters, which is a goddess, says that these are end times, and that also about the black goo. Apparently, they also involve very fast spinning atoms that transmits information from one to the other with no loss of energy. So, yeah, it's probably talking about the same thing, except it's the pure type. It's not the polluted one that we hear about. That also is practically the one that represents the biggest threat, because the Draco use it, and also others, I think Abraxas, and apparently it comes from another universe, and that's why you have all these factions uniting against this AI. And this, is probably traceable to Metatron, but that's getting a little deep.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's fascinating to think about, and we could obviously have an entire other conversation about that. But just to stick to the topic at hand and start wrap this up, I know you said that the German story is a long story. I don't know if that's something you'd be willing to summarize really quick before the end, or we could touch on that another time. It's up to you.
I can, go over the highlights, because it's only worth a chapter in the book, but every line is gold. However, there is a caveat, because it's actually one of the best books on Hollow Earth. It's called Genesis for the New Space Age by John Leith, who is a World War II vet. However, it's part disinformation. It actually comes clean in the preface that it was necessary for him. He was also an OSS agent, but it's the way that it describes the need for disinformation, which is only partial, is actually pretty convincing and understandable in a way. So it's only for safety of the people, because it gives few examples that are quite compelling. But really, considering that this was written in the 1980 and that it's so ahead of the curve, I'd say that overwhelming amount is true, at least more than half. And if even 10% of it is true, it's pretty staggering. So the example was that, for example, it's misinformation that there's a 125 in diameter opening, and they misled that so people wouldn't go there and try to find it. And by the way, you did mention about Google Earth and such being doctored, and there's no doubt that they are doctored, but that still doesn't mean that it's an opening like we think is really wide. But there's definitely something going on there, because it is pixelated and widened out. So
right. Right.
But I can go into the Germans if you want.
Yeah, we've been going for quite a while, so I guess I'm sure the audience is going to want to go for that ride. So we'll buckle up and we'll dive into it a little bit here, but and then we'll start wrapping it up.
Sure. Okay, so it mentions the biggest maybe missing piece in all this Dark Fleet story, which is that the Germans, the the good example of their determination, their iron will, and their many twists of fate is that they, in 1572, 500 of them, men and women, they were mercenaries and warrior colonists, and they were tasked with building forts and garrisons deep in the Amazon, between the border and Brazil and Peru. And they got there and they were attacked by headhunters, Indians, and they were presumed dead because they never made it back. And so this is 4,000 miles into the continent, and they were mainly Bavarians, but also East Prussians and some other Germanic spots. And they were mercenaries for King Sebastian I. And they, at the time, the continent was split between Spanish and Germans, and they took their wives with them as well. And they considered themselves persecuted Lutherans, and they were persecuted by the Catholics. So this also kind of goes hand in glove with what we've been hearing. And so they went in these 130-foot warships called urkas, and
This was back in the 1500s still?
1572, yes.
Okay.
All of this. So their ships got destroyed by these natives and were very aggressive, not all of them, but this particular tribe. And they managed to remove their cattle and their seeds and other goods from the ship before they got destroyed. And they retreated deep into the jungle, and they had to resort to stealth. They had to adapt to their ways, because they were it wouldn't be enough to just be aggressive, because they were outnumbered, and they did have armor, and they did stave them off well with their crossbows, which were a step above the Indians' bows. So they retreated in this cave, and luckily for them, the Indians were very reticent from attacking them from there, because they were scared of evil spirits from that cave. And so they took refuge there, and they periodically went to the surface to gather produce and other supplies. And they found there they had rivulets and sources of water, and they could actually make a pretty decent existence. They used fires first of all, and then they just used their well-known German ingenuity to just grit it out and not get overwhelmed by despair. And they were at the same time very isolated, and just that one cave wasn't going to do it. So they sent teams of 30 deeper into the cave and found out that they were a very long complex of tunnels. And they went to the next one, and it was 70 to 75 square kilometers in size, a cavern. And also, just quickly, that caverns are never, the ones that are inhabited by these peoples are never at random, and they're never excavated, or very rarely, because they happen when Earth's meridians or natural energy lines overlap and form a vortex, which precludes matter from forming there. So not only that matter can form, but they're especially energized spaces because of those meridians.
So a lot of these caves aren't actually all formed from water erosion like we're taught. It's actually, there's a vortex there that prevents any matter from developing in that area.
Correct. And not just that, but I should also mention that the Earth gets more honeycombed as you go deeper, and this was confirmed by the seismograms. They found blobs that were inexplainable that slowed down considerably the waves. But anyway, so they got deeper, and they found this big cavern, and they settled it, and they noticed that on the plus side, they had rich soil, and they had very good temperature, between 80 and 100 degrees, and they had fresh source of water, and that was very cold as well. But on the other hand, they still had trouble with sustenance. But still, the lack of rain, cold, and stuff, at least could make up for it. And maybe the subtler, the more refined, energetics of the place. But yeah, they were fear of predators seemingly until they dug deeper, and they got attacked by what they realized were those evil spirits that Indians were scared of, which they called sons of Satan. But they weren't spirits; they were creatures that also retreated because of turbulent times on the surface, and this is a theme often. But yeah, this just goes to show that not everyone is well intended, but they did offer these sons of Satan, quote unquote, to guide them back to the surface, but they didn't take that, and they walled them up. So they had to dig through a lot of rubble, but eventually they made it through, and so they established cities, and it just goes to show the perseverance and determination of the Germans. Go ahead.
Right. Yeah. So back in the 1572 is when the first record of Germans making it to inner Earth. That's the first record that we have. And that's interesting. I had not heard that story, but it would make sense why they had such a fascination with exploring further, getting there. And obviously they were in communication with ETs also. And there's that whole narrative that most of our audience is familiar with. But I wasn't aware of how early back it went.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. But it does put a lot of things into perspective. And they still surface rarely, but they still traded on the surface, but they kept their location a very tightly guarded secret. And you do hear rumors of white people recently as well in the jungle, and that would explain it. But they found more and more cavities, and apparently the populations of those today, they are still inhabited. It's between 30 to 180,000, which is very consistent with the numbers that we hear, for example, under Romania, which is about 200,000. Mm-hmm. So it depends, of course, case by case, how much you're afforded, how much space. But they actually had to implement a child cap rule because it got out of hand after a while. But so around 1600, they implemented cart tracks, a rudimentary cart and wheel and track, so they would be able to transport the produce. But this was the turning point was when they, after 75 years of traveling down this tunnel system, they finally, after 3 generations, so many of them hadn't even seen the surface, they got so deep that they got to the other side of the earth, and they were very jubilant, and they called many of them from the cave system, and they all went down there, and they were certain that they had made it back to the surface, which was legend for them, but they had no idea they were actually in hollow earth. So they saw rolling hills and lush vegetation, and they were greeted by what apparently is Atlanteans or Aturians. And they were very hospitable, like all these peoples are, and they welcoming, and they saw that their technology was way ahead. They had round wing planes, and that made no noise, and they were quickly made the connection to another civilization there. They called them there, knowing that they were probably related. And it turns out that this new civilization actually were the family or the forefathers of the German peoples. They were called the Bodlanders, and they even offered what are they called? They have a nickname, something with rock people, the Germans, to settle there, and which they took them on, but with the stipulation that they would commit no act of violence.
So you're telling, so this is why we hear so many, like just going back to the Smoky God. I know you said there's discrepancies, but they encountered a German speaking dialect, right? A German dialect, I should say. And then I believe if you want to believe in Admiral Byrd's diary or not, the same thing. the German dialect, and this goes. So it's very interesting, the connection there.
Yeah, of course, and yeah, it goes back a long way. So also, I forgot to mention that the way they managed to make sense of anything visually inside is that photosynthesis, and also the fact that you had lava pools not too far off these caverns, and this goes back to the way that elements basically arrange themselves and compensate in these places that like the caverns inside. So that accounts for the plant's growth and stuff, and they did have to adjust slightly visual to their eyes, but they managed to do it. So by now they have at least 3,000 miles of labyrinth. So it's very serpentine. It's not straight. In the meantime, they did manage to make many shortcuts, but by the time that they had reached Hollow Earth, they were already from the border of Peru and Brazil down to the midway point between New Zealand and Australia. So, yeah, and
Wow.
they apparently, these Hollow Earth people didn't age either. They had no creases on their face. And the Bodlanders, who I mentioned, were, the root people of today's, and those Germans were 30,000 years. Their civilization down there was 30,000 years old, and they also seek refuge because they had been attacked on the surface by a space race who they called something with serpentine. So that gives you a hint.
Right.
But yeah, they died by the millions in that attack, and only a few thousand survived. And also, they inhabited today's Iran, Pakistan, and Syria, I think. And they apparently, that was the place where the original Aryans were. And only later, because some of them made it down to Hollow Earth, and they're very advanced, possibly the most advanced there. But also, the ones that didn't make it down there made it to also through underground system, tunnel system, to the Black Forest in Germany and populated that place. That's how come you don't find the Aryans anymore in Iran. And
wow.
Yeah, and
Wow.
they accepted their stipulation for nonviolence, which is everything for them. And
Right.
you're right about them feeling your intent. So you can't fake it ever. You're gonna be, precognized or something.
Right.
So, yeah, the surplus also from the caves was taken down to populate this place which they were offered, which was uninhabited. And by now they formed what's called Six Kingdoms of Saxony, and they are very well developed. And apparently, their population in 1900 was 10 million in Hollow Earth, and in the early 1700s, they sent their royalty, the eldest of the royalty, the Germans, to the surface with the help of the Bodlanders, their craft, which traveled easily between the sides of the earth. And they were sworn to secrecy, of course, but they were flown there under the guise that they were sons of rich plantation owners in the Amazon. And they wanted to get a pulse on the surface, and they came back with merchandise and information, and also art and history education. And this is proof that they don't put so much emphasis on technology, that the ones in the caverns, in the caves, needed the surface technology. They borrowed one of our engineers from the surface Germany in the 19th century to help with reducing their squiggly lines, their tunnels. So it made their railway much more efficient and electric in time. They improved annually on it bit by bit, but so in time there were reports of these princes on the surface of Germany and the engineer that I mentioned spilled, and that's how Germany got more and more aware of what was going on down there. To
Yeah,
the
and
point of yeah.
that would explain why they were always ahead of the curve in all
sure.
areas. Yeah. Where can this story be found again?
It's called Genesis, and if you just Google the name Genesis and John Leith, you're gonna find a free PDF actually.
Okay. I'm gonna have to read that because this is absolutely fascinating to me. But I also I'll let you go ahead and just wrap up this segment of the story, and then we'll, for the sake of time, let's wrap up this episode. Maybe we could do this again another time. But
Gladly. Yeah, I'm actually 2/3 of the way with the German arc, so that's fine. Yeah, so they even sent not the Hollow Earth Germans because they were sworn to nonviolence, but the Cavern ones sent a regiment in World War II in World War I to fight on the side of Germans, and that led to more and more relations, and they were glad to reconvene with their 14 generations apart relatives. And they gave them, the surface dwellers, the advice that they should make this known, that they should make the interior, that it's habitable, popular. And apparently in one of the deals post-World War I, the Germans demanded access to the South Pole for colonization. And the Americans and the British considered this so out there because they said that, first of all, it's just a place for icicles and seals. And they also mentioned in the stipulation that the reason for it, I forgot to mention, is that they wanted to get to the civilization inside Earth. So they were very transparent. And they probably knew that it would sound so ludicrous, that it would make it more conducive to their goal. So they granted the place in Antarctica that they demanded. And then Adolf Hitler apparently was very fascinated with all this, although he wasn't allowed in. None of them were, except like that engineer, very, very few select cases. But he was obsessed, and he gathered all the data he could. And he was invited at one point by King Hakus III, who was the king of the Bodlanders, down there, and him and also some higher echelon people, and they were treated like royalty. After that, he returned the favor and invited them too. And the king, knowing that, admiring his spirit, that his pride and nationalism, he warned him that if he were to go with his plans of conquering Poland and so on, that he would get quelled by the bigger nations than him. They would unite against him, and it would end in bloodshed. And he was, very against this. And so, but he didn't heed this advice. So we all know what happened. And despite the bloodshed, they still felt empathy for them because they were their indirect progeny. So they asked them, they allowed them, because they managed to. So it's described exactly like Neuschwabenland, which is a place of very rich vegetation and lakes, which also Admiral Byrd describes as having seen.
right.
An area of 450 square kilometers, which is impossible to cover that large an area. I mean, to account for the heat just through volcanoes. So it has to be obviously something else.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems that these that's where New Berlin is. It's in Hollow Earth. It was built by these people, these Germans, who during World War II, in 1943, when Hitler decided that he was on the losing end, he and the other Germans asked for the help of the intraterrestrials, and this time they made stricter conditions because one of the two stipulations that they gave to the cavern Germans was not only that they would be peaceful, but also that they wouldn't leave, because I guess they wanted to grow, to make those uninhabited places thriving. And
so you're saying that Hitler went inner Earth?
well, interesting that you mentioned that, because one of the things that is mentioned as being disinformation is that Hitler went to New Berlin. So that apparently wasn't the case, but I was just going by the book. So
Right.
yeah,
well, yeah, because there's the evidence that he went to Argentina also and all that stuff. So
many schools of thought there where he went. Yeah,
right.
definitely he lived on. There's no question. But yeah, and well, the point is they did get granted the permission, but they only a semi-arid land, so they figured might as well put them to good use. So they also helped the Botlanders, helped the second wave of Germans, which, by the way, they didn't intermingle. They were very strict about that. So they created 1,800 wells and railroads, and they just helped them. They nurtured them and saw them through. But also so they only allowed. There was a huge list of denied people, like anyone who persecuted the Jews or any ethnicity, or that were part of the concentration camps, the overseers, or the harshes, like Mengele and stuff.
Right.
This was what was interesting, that when they signed this treaty of the 30-year supervision that Botlanders would have over them, they didn't understand their original writing, their treaty. So he overlaid it with what's described as a glass screen, which instantly translated it. So that's reminiscent of the glass pad. So that for
Right.
1980, that's pretty good disclosure there.
Yeah.
And lastly, they also gave them the warning, the Botlanders, that should they not respect the conditions, that they have the weaponry to wipe them clean off so their lives would flash behind their eyes, in a millisecond. So, and yeah, the relationship between the second wave of Germans and the Six Kingdoms of Saxony is comparable to USA and Canada. So they know they pretty much only slight differences, but they still have their own personalities and methods of thinking and customs and stuff.
Right.
But overall, the cavern Germans did maintain their religion and their practice, their beliefs and their culture and identity. They were very strict about that. And that also explains the Teutonic nature of the space Germans.
Mm-hmm.
That would put it into perspective, and why they're not Nazis, because there was much more short-lived than all these people who had time to develop. And yeah, that's in a nutshell what
That's a big nutshell. I don't even think I need to read the book now. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up because I have reached my limit for retaining any more information right now, and I'm sure other people have too as well. This is probably one of our longest episodes. We don't go that long for that very reason, because just like they determined that after an 8-hour workday, people are no longer effective. It's the same way with retaining information after so long. That's why TikToks are a minute, the attention span of civilization is just not there anymore. But I know the people that have stuck around. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. And thank you for coming on and sharing all your knowledge. This has been absolutely fascinating. And in more than one way, this is incredible information. And I'm excited to cover it like we did, because we haven't really dove that deep into it. And thank you again for coming on. Do you have anything you want to share as far as links or where people can find you?
Well, just thanks a lot for having me on. It's really cool. I've been watching your show for a couple of years, so did not see this coming. So anytime, happy to come on. But yeah, this goes so much deeper. I can't even put it into words. So we only covered the surface here, but yeah, maybe we'll, reconvene in, I don't know, half a year or a year. But so as for links, yeah, I have a fledgling YouTube channel called Saint Olga 69. And I made some SSP and a few Hollow Earth related videos too. So you can check that out if you want.
Saint Olga 69 on YouTube. I'll put that link below. That's how I discovered you originally. I was watching your videos on the SSP, and you do really great work, and editing is very, very well put together. So I recommend everybody go check that out. It's very digestible information. So yeah, thank you again. This has been fantastic. Thank you guys all for tuning in. We love you all. And until next time, have a great evening. Good night.
Good night, guys.